Cranky Geek Fall 2022 is brought to you by Google, Spearline, Crisp, and Daily. For more information, see the links in the description.
All right, we are back. I'm really excited to get this crew together. WebRTC started, and really as an open source initiative that Google started. I don't think the industry would be anywhere near it is today. There's no way it'd be where it is today without the support of the open source community. And to talk more about this, we have four different open source leaders from different projects. I have Lorenzo from Janus, and Miniero, Saúl from Jitsi,
Hey, y'all.
Jose from mediasoup, and Sean from Pion. So, whoops, clicking too fast. So, we'll cover a few different topics today. First is why use open source in the first place. We'll talk a little bit about what WebRTC can do better. We'll talk, how the WebRTC development, communities changed. Has it gotten better? Are people easier to work with? And we'll wrap up with some discussions of some of the interesting things that are happening in each of these projects. So maybe to start out, if I'm going to go build a WebRTC-based service, why should I start with open source versus using kind of a communications platform as a service, or even somebody like Zoom who's out there who's pushing more APIs? Maybe I'll start with you, Saúl.
I have conflicting thoughts about that one, because I think that unless you're building a very specific video conferencing application, you probably shouldn't be using something you build yourself to start with. I think you're probably better off picking an API platform that you can use. Could be something you self-host, but something that's kind of built already, so you can focus on improving your product and adding video to it. If you're making your thing like a video-only thing, then you probably, yes, you will want to build on top of some of the giants here in this room, or something of the sort. But if you have your own product that so happens to have, video is your second most important feature, then you should probably be using a platform and focus on your product, at least until you grow, and then, then go from there.
All right. So I should also say, you're backed by a commercial entity, 8x8, and I guess you have a CPaaS offer. I'm
right,
curious.
But we also have an open source offer, right? We navigate both waters, and in fact, we tell this to our customers. That we say, well, look, it goes both ways. You can start with the open source, and if you're comfortable with it, you like it. But now that you like this solution, you're like, all right, I'm comfortable offloading that to you. Well, you can use our CPaaS. But the other road is also possible, which is like you use your CPaaS and you're not happy with whatever direction it takes in the future, you can always go back to hosting it yourself. Everything is open source, so you can get it. So it's like, Tsahi put it very well in the blog post he wrote with us. It's a two-way street. So you can go start on the open source, start on the CPaaS, and go from one to the other. It's about where would you want to begin, but we like to give you both options, of course.
Well, maybe Lorenzo, I'll let you talk about Janus next. Janus is used in many different services out there. How do you see this? Why should a developer use open source or start with open source, versus using a CPaaS?
I agree with Saúl that especially to start, usually a CPaaS is a good idea, mostly because sometimes you are not that skilled in the technology itself. And so using APIs and not having to actually build something of your own can actually help you grow much more quickly than if you had to start from ground zero, basically. The problem I see is that these CPaaS solutions are usually expensive. And I know this for a fact because we do have some customers that basically chose us to implement a replacement of whatever they had built with the CPaaS, just because it was way too expensive for them to keep on using that, maybe because they had either grown too successful or the way that they were using the CPaaS cost too much, basically. And there's also the fact that CPaaS are usually very good at what they do, but they're also much more rigid in terms of what you can do with them. So the moment you have a more unique use case in mind that possibly you cannot really implement or accommodate easily using a CPaaS, then using one of the open source solutions where you have more control over what you want to do may be a better choice to do that. And in principle, of course, as Saúl said, there's also the matter of on-premise deployments. So with Jitsi, you can do both, but with most CPaaS solutions, you can. So it's either you use the APIs in the cloud or you're done, basically. So if you really do need to have something on-premise, then having something that you can actually control and deploy on your own can actually be a good thing to do.
Yeah, Jose, any quick comments on this topic?
Yes, I think it depends on how WebRTC centric the service you are building is. So if it relies on WebRTC a lot, probably you want some in-house knowledge, and probably you want to take a look to the open source projects out there, the communities out there, the support out there, how which other solutions use this product, and maybe try one of those, the one that fits the most. If you expect that you will have to invest on the technology itself.
And then maybe last I'll ask Sean. You comment. I think Pion's a little bit unique compared to our other the other projects, that there's really no commercial entity beyond Pion out there backing things up, right? So I guess does that change your perspective on why use open source when I guess without some of those backing commercial considerations? Is that good or bad too?
The person that knows your product best is yourself. So I think the most important thing when building something is autonomy. Like if you want to go make modifications, if you want to take things in a way that's best for your business, you can go make those modifications with open source. No one else is going to have your best interests at heart except you. And so that's kind of the way I operate. And I think the other important thing is also, as an individual contributor, when you use open source, you're learning these skills. For me, it's just a more autonomous, joyful process to use open source. So I think there's parts of it that are good for the business. There's parts of it that are good for the individual. The analogy I always make is like, it's like if you're working on your own house, you can hire someone to come in and do it, and they'll do a good job and they're experts. But sometimes it's worth learning something your own and doing it yourself because you really care about how it's done. So I don't think it's all shades of gray, and it really depends on what your goals are and who you are as an individual. It's the same with like why use any particular open source project. They all speak to like your particular needs and your particular opinions.
So with that, maybe I'd like to shift to our next topic, and really, what can WebRTC do better? And I guess we'll cover this from a few different angles. And one, there's like what can the Google WebRTC.org team that we'll have speak here later on. What can they do to serve you and your communities better? I also think there's the browser community out there also, and perhaps even the standards community. But maybe to start out, I'll let Lorenzo handle that one first. Maybe you can start by covering what can what can the WebRTC org team, Chrome team, or I should say Chromium WebRTC team there do to better push WebRTC, and then I say from there the broader community.
Yeah, in general, I think, to be honest, I think they did well so far. I mean, if WebRTC has been so successful this far, and if we have got to the point where it's deployed on basically every single machine out there, it's also thanks to the work that they made. So I don't really have any complaint about how the process evolved across the years. So it may have been a bit of a bumpy road, especially at the beginning when there was a lot of incompatibility between different implementations, but that's something that often happens whenever standardization is involved. And it's why in the ITF itself you have it's important to have competing implementations and ensuring that they interact with each other. It took a bit too long sometimes with WebRTC, mostly because it was very much a specification that evolved over time, but I think we got to a point where it's actually really stable, it's really usable, we are using it right now quite effectively. And it basically allowed all of us in this panel to actually build very interesting frameworks and applications to do cool things. So I don't really have anything specific in mind that I think they could do better, also because my interactions with the team whenever it was needed were always quite fruitful. So whenever I had some kind of an issue, it was enough to open issues or talk to the right people, and basically problems could be identified and sorted somehow.
Maybe next I'll ask Jose. Yeah, I think you and Iñaki, your other co-founder of mediasoup, have been big advocates of the object RTC, object-oriented approach to WebRTC. That's really a standards thing. So I'm curious, how do you see the mix between standards and the browser implementations? Are they serving you well, or do you still find that a challenge?
I think we have reached the point of stability where we cannot complain. The way up to here was sometimes a bit hard with different vendors of browsers, etc. Unfortunately, we had a SDP on WebRTC specifications, and probably we are moving to object-based SDP media negotiation. We already in mediasoup we somehow hit the SDP out of the API, and we think that was a really good decision to do. And yeah, but there's no complaint on that regard today.
Maybe Sean, I guess I'm curious your thoughts on the same question.
Yeah, WebRTC, the project at Google, like Google is a business, it's not a charity. So I think it's naive to ask them to go out and fix random things that don't affect their business. As far as how Google operates as a business, I'm incredibly impressed. I mean, they spent millions of dollars buying the components that make up WebRTC from the acquisitions. They then made it open source so that they made it open source so it can end up in the other browsers. They had to open source it so that it would end up in Firefox and Safari. Like, it was all incredible business moves to get it everywhere. And I mean, because of that, we're having this conversation today. Outside of that, for the general WebRTC community, the thing I've been trying to solve, the thing that I think is important, is education. So things like WebRTC for the curious, and like encouraging people to go and read the source code of these WebRTC projects. There's a lot of arrogance on WebRTC implementers that people aren't smart enough. They need to go and use APIs, don't question us. And I think there's a lot of really smart people out there, and we need to encourage them to get involved. And then the other one is more empathy to interesting use cases. So like when WebRTC started off, everyone just said, no, it's just conferencing. And then people made it happen for gaming. And now people are making it happen for broadcast. And I'm seeing a lot of uptake in like the embedded and the robotic space. You see a lot of companies like Boston Dynamics is using WebRTC and stuff like that. So if we have more empathy and are more accepting of these new use cases, it just makes it more robust for everyone.
Yeah, I'm curious too. And well, essentially you talk about different types of endpoints out there. Well, certainly, I guess the browsers are still a big endpoint too. Right? Do you see a lot of, I guess, improvement there? Is interoperability happening, or there's still a lot of, do you see a lot of big differences between, Chrome, Firefox, Safari?
No, I'm very happy with it these days. For me, I think a lot of people are frustrated if they're browser developers, but my perception of WebRTC is WebRTC the protocol. And WebRTC the protocol has been robust for many, many years for me. Like, people might have issues with, when I do this with get user media and I pass it to this, it behaves differently. Those problems don't really exist for me because I'm operating in a different space.
Maybe next, actually, I'll ask the same question to Saúl. I mean, you're a big React guy, run some projects there, but you also span native, mobile, and web. How do you see the state of WebRTC interoperability between browsers, between devices, and just making this making it work with endpoints?
So it has gotten a lot better. I agree with the sentiment of the room that the implementation is more robust. It's easier to use. You can tell it has achieved maturity. There's still some areas that are where things can be improved. One that comes to mind is especially in Unified Plan, some of the for example, the on-track APIs, like literally nobody is using the native C++ on-track implementation because of the web semantics. So Chromium rolls its own, Safari stopped using it, Firefox I don't think it is either. So then at one point is, well, that API is kind of dead. Maybe we should fix it in the C++ layer and make it good for everybody. But kind of zooming out on a different direction, what I think that while WebRTC has given us some great APIs, I still see it as a leaky abstraction. So you can see through to the all the way to the SDP. The fact that you need to create a transceiver, even the terminology. If you show these APIs to someone who has never worked in any VoIP-related technologies, it's all mumbo jumbo. And I think we could potentially have some simpler APIs, which is, the way they started, which is I do get display media, I get this stream, I add this stream to this opaque, wonderful peer connection, and boom, things show up on the other end. Now it's like, well, wait a minute, I get a stream, but then I do add tracks. Like, what? The way everything works, it matches the way things happen at the very, very low level. So in my opinion, I think some refinement or some kind of coat of paint on top of everything would be nice to lower that barrier of entry. And then those who really want to dive deeper in the protocol, like Sean said, they would still be able to do so. But have like a simpler API to use on the surface. Now that we have kind of low-ish level components, maybe that's something that can be built on top of it. And then you can always pop the hood and look at how things work.
Okay. Well, there's a lot there. Maybe on that topic, maybe we can transition to a little bit like how the open source development community has changed, right? Because I do want to go back to that picture I showed where there's actually fewer users than we had during the peak of the pandemic, but they're actually doing more stuff. So what are they doing, right? They must be getting by with existing APIs or the higher level APIs that you all are writing on top of it. Maybe to handle that question first, I'll bring Sean. I guess what do you see changed in your community and in the broader WebRTC development community in the last couple of years since the pandemic?
I think those numbers are trending up because we're seeing more individual ownership. In the past, a couple of years, we now have a Rust implementation in WebRTC. We have a pure TypeScript implementation. We have more people building like sub projects. I see like there are people that have like, they'll take Janus and then they'll ship it with like specific configs and UIs to like hit their specific use case. So I'm really inspired by that. Like there was in the early days of WebRTC, it felt like there was this attitude that we'll give you this software, but you are not smart enough to understand it or get involved. And I like that the WebRTC community has become more inclusive and more encouraging of people to build things. We have the WebRTC Slack on video dev. We have pretty active on Twitter, like the community. So I think that's what it's coming from, is like we've encouraged people to do ownership, and through that, I'm seeing a lot of experimentation and interesting ideas, and like a lot of people that are growing as like developers as well. So that's what's really inspiring for me. I'm not sure, like I'm sure some of it is from COVID, but I'm optimistic that some of it is because of like a culture shift in WebRTC.
Yeah. Maybe next, Lorenzo.
Yeah, I agree that in principle, the pandemic definitely accelerated the interest in RTC services in the first place. So I think that the main reason why we're seeing such a growing interest in the technology is mostly because people actually had a growing need for this kind of services, so something that they didn't have before. And this definitely caused an explosion of interest in several different projects. So our own definitely saw a spike. If you just see the stars on GitHub, for instance, you can see definitely a correlation between that period and the level of interest that there was. And so this, of course, increased the number of, let's say, quote-unquote leechers, so people that were just interested in taking something that worked and use it, but also facilitated basically the getting new fresh blood basically into this project in the first place. So new smart people getting interested in projects, starting to learn and understand more about these projects, as Sean said, studying more the technology and basically learning more how to contribute in projects that that did have a high barrier of entry just because of the sheer complexity of the protocol in the first place. And luckily, this seems to have changed a bit also because, as Saúl said, the technology is very mature now. There are many more resources that you have access to study the technology and actually be able to contribute in a meaningful way.
Maybe Jose, I'll ask you next. I mean, going back to Saúl's previous comment about the need for easier, higher level APIs, I would say mediasoup has gone the opposite direction, right? Where there's more transparency, it's more closer to the core kind of lower level API specs. I mean, how has that, how have you seen your development community grown with, of those, I guess, more hardcore, lower level developers?
So we are using the same trend that Sean and Lorenzo said. There is more involvement in the last times. There's people which is very involved in the project, generating a lot of improvements. As an example, we have a new core contributor, which is Nazar. He has made a lot of great enhancement on performance, memory optimizations. He has written mediasoup in Rust, so it uses the C++ worker the same way we do with Node.js. So we have yet another entry point. We have another user that has do the same in Go. So you really can see the interest on people that are really more super involved, and this is very positively surprising. Also, people are. I mean, this is like the community is getting a traction where you don't need to be on top of the forum, for example. So people answer questions of other people already. So it's like the open source community is just rolling by itself, and it's super satisfying seeing that after the hard work.
Okay. We have a growing queue of questions, so just to close things out before we get into the audience Q&A, maybe I think each of you spend, if you could spend like 1 minute, just giving some highlights. What are some of the new things that you are working on in your projects, or that you want to highlight, or that you think are interesting for the community? And Saúl, since I can give you a chance on the last one, I'll let you take this one first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Well, right now we are, for example, very focused on huge meetings. So we did a prior effort, which we call large meetings, that involved having 500 participants in a meeting. And now huge meetings are 10,000 plus participants in a single meeting. We're kind of going a slightly different route than WebWeb. Instead of you being like just a receiver, you're part of the meeting, so you can then take part in that meeting. And earlier this week, we crossed the 10,000 participant in a meeting in our benchmarks. So it's looking real promising, and that's one of the biggest things we're tackling at this moment.
Jose, you want to go next?
Yes, in our case, I think right now it is performance where we are putting our attention. So as I said, there were some recent performance pull requests with memory optimizations. Right now, we are working on replacing as a worker internal communication format. We are replacing JSON in favor of flat buffers, which is a zero copy serializing library that allows us to communicate from Rust or Node with a browser, and the other way around without the need of parsing anything. So it's really fast. And we are putting efforts on being efficient, like energy efficient, being able to produce a lot of media in low level machines, etc.
Oh, great. Lorenzo, why don't you go next?
Yeah, more in general, we've been working a lot on scalability recently, in part because of the virtual event platform that you work on. So the one that we use to, for instance, provide remote participation support for IETF meetings and the like. But more in general, also for the new version of Janus that is multi-stream based, so multiple peer connections in the same, multiple streams in the same peer connection. And so we've been working on how to properly cascade these across multiple Janus instances more or less transparently. And closely related to the scalability aspect, there's the scenario of broadcasting in the first place, which was very dear to my heart because it was the topic of my PhD thesis a few years ago. And so I've been paying close attention to whip and web in particular as technologies, so the ones that Sergio will talk about later. I've been implementing prototypes of that, and there's a lot of interesting things to say about how to actually implement tree-based distributions, to actually implement cascading over there. And related to that, I also see whip and web as a theoretical and potential mechanism for implementing some sort of WebRTC federation as well. So probably utopia, but something that may be worth exploring in the future. And really just a couple of words on something that I haven't started working yet, but I'm paying attention to is quick as a transport in general. Like media over quick is something that I care about. And I'd like to see how it can interact with WebRTC somehow in the future.
Oh, awesome. Sean, I'll have you go next. I know there's a lot of different Pion projects, but maybe can you give us some quick highlights?
Yeah. So in the last year, Matisse has been working on a PureGo congestion controller. And so now, you can measure and know the quality of the link. And I think that's also really important for people to go and understand. Like congestion controllers are kind of just everyone hand wavy magic. Like let's import a library and it will be okay. So I'm excited for people to go and learn from them. And that was paid by an LNet. Matisse also worked on a WebRTC stats implementation. So you can point Pion at your WebRTC servers and have it measure. I spent some time working on a PureGo implementation of the Opus codec. And so you can throw a Go file at it, or throw an Opus file at a Go program and have it decode and play back. And I'm not sure how much use it will see, but I was more excited for the learning opportunity and just another thing to make this more accessible. And then the thing I'm most proud or excited for is all of the people that have gotten involved and are working independently. So I went through the top contributors, and I just want to thank Matisse, Sushi, Danielle, Atir, G, Raja, Adrian, Yutaka, Stefan, and Jerry. I think that's the thing I'm most proud of this project, that, if something happened to me, that it would go on and these people would be involved. And I'm happy to see, hopefully they're finding it a joyful process and they're getting something out of it.
All right. That's great. Thanks, Sean. Now let's I could easily ask you guys questions for the rest of the day, but I want to give the audience some chance. Sai, I think he has some questions queued up. All right, first question from Pavel: open source for CPaaS should ask people who use both, sometimes in the same project, going one direction or the opposite. Some additional reasons to what mentioned by the amazing panelists. Anyone have a comment on that? And so you mentioned a lot, covering both open source.
Mentioned in the direction or the opposite, but I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I mean, as I said, we've seen the road go both ways. First, because we made it so easy to run the open source thing. I think it's actually something really important, and what actually took me to use Janus many years ago was that you need to be able to run software quick, see that it works, right? Yeah. And so at Jitsi we try to do that. And well, the idea is you run it, you feel comfortable with it, and then you're like, well, all right, now I need to scale this, and I'm going to need a team. I'm going to need people on call. Do I want to pay for that? Well, we established that CPaaS might cost some money. But then the thing is, you don't need to worry about that, because somebody is worrying about that, running on multiple regions closer to the edge, yada yada. So that is one of the roads, and the opposite road is for certain reason we no longer like how this business is run, or we need to do some customizations that are unacceptable upstream, and we're happy to just floating patches. And we run it on-prem, or just purely because the policy of this company or whatever it is that this absolutely has to run on our own bare metal. And well, then you're welcome to use it. Of course, us particularly, we don't offer support there. So some companies might offer. I know Lorenzo, for instance, they do consulting services as well. So there's also that aspect of it, right? Which is when you run it yourself, you will need help at one point, and where do you get it from?
All right, we're gonna get through a few more. This one from Manic, past Cranky Geek speaker. All right. What specifically should a new person in the WebRTC community look for when deciding which open source project to go with? What guidance do you recommend? And maybe I'll let Lorenzo, why don't you go first, and then Sean.
Yeah, in general, I think that Sean may indeed be the right person to ask, mostly because he has done a lot in, as he said, that trying to work a lot on educating people that are new to the business. So he did a great job, for instance, with the WebRTC for the Curious book, which is a very good introduction to WebRTC as a technology, which I think is very much the first thing that you should do before actually choosing an open source project to do that, because first you need to have at least a basic understanding of how WebRTC works as a technology in order to understand what it can do for you. And then once you have a better idea of what it is, then you can check the different open source projects to see which one is the closest fit to what you need, because some may have a more vertical approach that is closer to what you need, others may be more general purpose, and so may help you on some more specific and weird edge case you have in mind. So it really depends on what you actually need, but it all starts from understanding the technology that you are going to approach.
Okay. All right, Sean, we're almost out of time, but if you have any other anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think pick the one that maps closest to your mental model of software. So if you have a bunch of node servers, I think mediasoup is a no-brainer. If, like for my case, I'm working at a company that's all Go, and so that's the reason that they use Pion. And then like for like Lorenzo, like I worked at a company that we were doing a lot of like bridging, and so it has these really great RTP forwarders. So like to have to go and write all that code, it's way easier to just spin up a Janus instance and bend a config that you can just pipe out RTP and have them render. So like all of it's the same with like human language. Like that's the reason that some operas are in Italian. So like there's a reason why like you pick the language that makes sense for how you think and how you operate. Like that's why APIs are so difficult, because we invent all these APIs just to map how people think, and you have to find the one that maps to how you think about the problem.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much. We'll be back in just a minute with our next speaker, Google Meet, talking about how they use AI.
Thank you to our sponsors, Google and WebRTC.org, supporting web real-time communications. Spearline, guarantee a better customer experience by testing, monitoring, and benchmarking your voice and video communications. Crisp, Crisp's AI solution removes background noise and echo from meetings. Daily, build communications into any application.